Oh, thank you for joining me and my cat Frank for what I'm calling Wind and Truth, Yay or Nay, in which we discuss in a little more detail some of my gripes and some of the things I liked about Brandon Sanderson's latest novel, Wind and Truth, and decide once and for all where we land. Yay or nay? If you would like, I did just record a brief little summary video about the novel, giving a quick overview of the series and a very quick, very truncated summary of the plot as well, in case you haven't read it or need a refresher, or maybe even if you're preparing to read it or just want to be able to talk to your friends about it. So go ahead and check that out. I should say now, before I go any further, that there are spoilers ahead. So if you have not yet read the novel or have not yet finished it and you don't want to hear any spoilers, please stop now. All right, let's get started. I like to keep things positive around here, so why don't we go ahead and start with something in the yay column for Wind and Truth. And that is for me the storyline following Adolin and Yonaghan in the fight for Azemir. So quick overview here, or reminder for those of you who have read it. The novel follows the events across 10 days, and each of the different main characters is kind of spread out around the planet and beyond, dealing with different conflicts that have erupted in this period of 10 days before the final contest of champions is going to take place between a champion of Odium's and Dalinar as the champion of honor. And one of the terms in this agreement for the contest of champions is that at the end of that 10 days, when the contest starts, whatever side is holding a territory on the planet is now the legal and rightful owner of that territory. So these very fierce battles erupt in a couple places around the planet where the opposing forces are fighting for control of the capital cities so that they'll be in control of the territories when this 10-day clock runs out. So Dalinar's son Adolin travels to the city of Azemir to help them defend the city. And it's a very unique kind of defense situation, which is also definitely part of why this is in the yay column for me. I'm not like a big military girly or anything like that, so sometimes in fantasy big descriptions of like battle tactics and stuff will kind of tire me a little bit. But in this case, I found it really interesting because it was kind of a unique setting and a unique puzzle for the characters to solve. So in the capital city of Azemir, there is an oath gate, which is kind of a magical portal that can be used to travel between the physical realm and the cognitive realm, and thus you can kind of travel long distances very quickly. It's sort of like a like a fast travel point in a video game almost. So in the city of Azemir, they have this oath gate, and then they built this big brass dome, big building around it, and it's kind of like a big circular building topped with a big dome. And the enemy forces are arriving through that oath gate. So the defending forces in the city, including Adolin, they're kind of trying to figure out how to best use that kind of like bottleneck scenario and protect the city and kind of keep the enemy forces like within that dome. They are overwhelmed, and eventually the city does fall to the enemy forces. But Adolin and Yonaghan and some of their compatriots realize that there's even further like little logistical detail for this contract, which is based on the tradition of Azemir. As long as the emperor is on the throne, Azemir stands, is kind of a line that they repeat in the book. So they realize that if they can get to the throne room in the palace and hold the throne room until the contest deadlines, even though there's enemy forces in the rest of the city, they will kind of win Azemir in the end. And that was a really like fun, exciting plot twist because the unique backstory of the emperor of Azemir, Yonaghan, is the country has a very unique way of kind of choosing their leaders, which we don't necessarily have to go into, but suffice to say, Yanagon like grew up on the streets as a thief before being made emperor, which is essentially like a ceremonial figurehead position as opposed to like a really like in the details kind of leader. So it was a really fun like and satisfying twist for his character, because then it was like, oh, his background and his skills as a thief made it so that they could get into the palace and get to the throne room. And then the kind of final big climactic reveal and resolution for this plot is Adolin is not a knight radiant, but he has a spren who he is, I guess we would say bonded to, even though they don't have a radiant bond, because his spren is a deadeye, which means that she was bonded to a radiant at some point, and they broke their oath to her and kind of like damaged her spirit. And there are a lot of deadeye spren who have been kind of written off by humans as being like damaged and almost like zombies or something, like just not capable. And they've been very hurt because their oaths with other humans have been abandoned in the past. So she, for most of the novel, is off trying to recruit other spren, and Adolin thinks she's trying to recruit honor spren, but when she shows back up, she has brought a bunch of other deadeye spren with her who are able to serve as shard blades and shard plates for all of Adolin's companions without them having to have formal Night Radiant bonds. So it's like a really fun, like, their backs are against the corner, they're like I was trying to say they're cornered and their backs are against the wall. So we got their backs are against the corner. Their backs are against the corner, and they're like surrounded by enemies, and Adolin is having this like boss battle in the throne room with this like scary guy. And then this friend shows up, and all of Adolin's friends get like an immediate level up, and they get like all this cool gear, this like magical armor and magical weapons, and they're able to hold the enemy forces at bay. So that storyline was very satisfying. I find Adolin to be a very compelling, complex, sympathetic character. And I would say of all of the subplots in the novel, that one was my favorite, and definitely in the yay column. Moving it relatedly in the nay column is that story felt very buried in the novel because there's so much going on. And I literally had this thought multiple times while I was reading it, like just Adolin's story and the plot I just summarized could be its own novel, and it would be great. And it has lots of compelling, secondary characters and culture clash. He and the Emperor kind of trying to get to know each other as friends, and their cultures are so different. They're learning from each other, and there's little power dynamics, and there's like a young woman who really wants to fight for her city, but she's too small to hold the like shield wall type line where they're defending in this dome, so she learns to shoot a bow and arrow. Like, I don't know. It's just like, there's a lot of cool stuff in there. And I feel like this is a good example of my biggest complaint about the novel is just the length. And as I said in my Rory summary video for this month, it's not that I'm opposed to reading long novels. So I don't just want to say like, oh, the book is too long and leave it there. It's like I'm trying to think of an analogy. It's almost like wearing too much jewelry, where if you had, like, let's say you just have beautiful, really expensive, or maybe an actor, for like the Oscars or some red carpet event is like lent all these gorgeous, priceless diamond jewelry, and they wear like a headband, they wear earrings, they wear like some nose chain connecting their earrings, they wear like a huge collar necklace, they wear like rings on every finger, bracelets stacked up their arms, belts, like all of that together would deter from any individual piece being able to shine. It's like it becomes too much, and it then muddies the effect of like a priceless centerpiece. And Brandon Sanderson is very good. He's an amazing world builder, and like I said, he writes really he is very capable of writing very compelling, complicated characters who have very complicated, very human feeling story arcs. But when there's so much of it, it's almost like you don't have the time or the mental capacity, or the narrative doesn't have the time to really spend with it. And he does spend a lot of time with all of those characters, but the result is asking readers to tackle a 1,400-page novel, a 62-hour audiobook, and you just get kind of overwhelmed. You get lost. So I think he does his characters and his stories a disservice by not being able to edit, and not being able to realize, like, some of this, although it feels central, it has to go to let the heart of the story really shine, and to make it something that people can really engage with. So yeah, I don't think that Brandon Sanderson is very good at killing his darlings, as we say in writing. All right, next for me is a major nay, which I did also mention in my most recent Rory video. And that is the kind of scope and stakes of the story. I personally, and again, I probably don't have to say this, but I guess just a reminder and a caveat that reading, like other art, is subjective, and it's made to be received by an individual and interpreted. And the way that we interpret it depends on our past experiences, our biases, our likes and dislikes, our context, all of those things. So I think there are many people out there who like how big the stakes and the scope of the Stormlight Archive series is. For me, at some point, it becomes kind of alienating and makes me feel less in touch with the story, and less makes it feel less sympathetic. So what I mean by that is, throughout the series, but especially kind of culminating in this 5th book, which is the last book in the first arc of the series. So I don't know what that means. I don't know if Brandon Sanderson has really said much about where that second arc is going to go, and if it's going to pick kind of right back up where we are. But either way, I think we can kind of consider these first 5 books in the Stormlight Archive as one series, and then we'll see where the rest of the arc goes for the second part of the series. But the underlying conflict in which all of the characters end up getting tied in their kind of individual ways is a conflict between gods, a conflict between the god Honor and the god Odium. So a little bit of backstory about them, which is provided throughout the series. The novels take place in a universe called Cosmere. And early in the history of the universe, there was one kind of powerful being or god in the universe. And at some point very early on in the history of the universe, he was attacked by 16 people. I shouldn't say humans, because we know at least one of them was a dragon, but 16 individuals, just not gods. They attack and kill him, and then they divide his power. So it's like the individual being dies, but his power doesn't die. So they divide it up into 16 parts, which are called shards. And because it was one holistic being's power that then gets segmented off, each shard represents a kind of an intention or a action, or kind of like a vibe that if you combined all 16 of them together, they kind of make a holistic, balanced being. But they fragment them. So that's why you get they're called things like, the shards are called things like honor, um, odium, who sometimes in like history has been called passion. Um, there's 16 of them, so there are a lot of them. Cultivation is another one that's kind of big in these stories. Um, so they're kind of splinters of that big god, and are basically gods themselves. So these are shards of power that are that each of these 16 attackers kind of takes one shard into themselves and elevates themselves to godhood, basically. They can be killed. These vessels can be killed, and the shard of power can transfer to another person. So odium and honor, we see that happen with odium and with honor. So they kind of separate out across the cosmere, across the universe, and they make an agreement like, we're going to stay away from each other so that each one of us can kind of have our own sphere of influence. We're not going to threaten each other, blah, blah, blah. Well, two of those people, before they attacked the god, were lovers. Cultivation, the person who ended up taking Cultivation's shard, and honor. So they stay separate for untold, millennia or whatever. It's like God scale timeline, and then they find each other again in this new planetary system that they discover, which is the planetary system of Roshar, where the novel takes place. And so Honor is there first and is kind of like loving Roshar and loving the native people on Roshar, who are the Parshendi, which is a non-human but kind of a humanoid, to put it in D&D terms, a humanoid race. And then Cultivation joins him, and then they realize that Odium, who was Honor's kind of rival before they became god killers and then gods themselves, Odium shows up on the planet next door, Ashwin, which is the home planet of humanity, at least in this planetary system. So that happens like 9,000 years or something before the events in the like main events of the series. And then Odium and Honor fighting each other is like what creates the like history of the world, and the people who they get to become their followers and the powers that they give to those people. Those are the heralds and the knights radiant and the void bringers and the spren. All of it, the magic system on the world, who's allied with who, the geopolitical status of the world at any given time, it like all follows out from this conflict amongst gods. So while I wouldn't really say that either of the gods is a protagonist in the series, in the sense that, we don't, they're antagonists, but they're not, I was trying to say they're not, while they aren't necessarily central characters, their conflict is the central conflict from which all others stem. And while I find the downstream conflicts, like, the conflict that Adolin and Yanagon encounter for the fate of Azamir, or like Shallan's kind of grappling with her past and trying to learn to become a Knight Radiant in essence, and like her relationship with her Spren and her family and all that. Like, I find all of those things interesting. But I just find the kind of overarching conflict to be unrelatable. It's just hard to. I honestly get bored. Like, and there are big sections, especially in this novel. There are big sections, chapters dedicated to like Honor's past and like hearing his whole story. And I'm just kind of like, okay, like I just feel like when the stakes get too high or the scope gets too big, it becomes almost abstract and it's hard to relate to, and it's hard to kind of like see the gods aren't people, they don't have lives and conflict in the same way. And actually that's kind of the point with the shards, is that that's kind of the like big closing arc and like resolution of Wind and Truth is Dalinar realizes that honor is simplistic and almost childlike because the power of honor values honor and oaths and like keeping your word above all else. And so, kind of as Dalinar like looks back over the history of the world, he realizes the power of honor at the end of the day has prioritized people keeping their word and keeping their oaths over everything else. And so terrible things can be done and you can still keep your word and do really, really shitty things. And so Dalinar kind of realizes like, oh, the power of honor is too one-sided and too simplistic to be truly good, and it's not balanced. And his hope for the future and kind of the resolution that he comes to at the end is because honor's power has been without a vessel for a long time, he thinks that the power has kind of started to mature and learn from watching, and he hopes that honor will become more balanced in the future. But as the novel closes, the vessel of odium takes the shard of honor as well, and so odium and honor combine and become retribution. So more complex, but still very like narrow-minded in terms of priorities. So yeah, it's kind of the point with the god stories that they're not humans, they're not complex, they can't like see things from different angles, and they don't have the same kind of like dynamic emotional inner lives and relationships and everything that humans have. And that's what makes stories interesting is like engaging with all of that. So that was a very long-winded way to say that the stake or scopes of the series in general, and specifically of Wind and Truth and the kind of like god level stuff, just kind of, it bores me. And I would like to spend more time with the characters and find it distracting and unappealing. And so that goes in the nay column for me, not just for this novel, but for the whole series. All right, my next point is kind of both a yay and a nay. And that is the novel's thematic interest. I'm being kind. I should probably say obsession with mental health and the concept of therapy. So, on the yay side, a pro is that, especially in high fantasy, I do think that mental health and characters' internal conflicts are rarely dealt with. And I've actually thought about this a lot, especially because I'm working on writing my own fantasy novel. And of course, as a reader, I always like to imagine myself into the stories that I'm reading. So I'll be reading Lord of the Rings or Wheel of Time or Harry Potter or Actar or whatever. And, you imagine yourself into the story. And a lot of those stories, it's kind of the classic fantasy trope, usually, that you start with a character who is a level 1 character. Yeah, if you're playing D&D, and is just kind of a normal person and gets caught up in a conflict, or discovers their wizard or whatever the case may be, and kind of has to enter this new part of their life and has to learn a lot of things. And so for example, in the Stormlight Archive series, like Kaladin enlists in the military even though he was training to be a surgeon under his father because he wants to protect his brother. And so he has to kind of quickly enter into military life and learn that, and then he has a conflict with a commanding officer and gets enslaved and finds himself kind of leading this crew of slaves who are made to carry these big heavy bridges around so that soldiers can cross them. And he like enters into a new stage of life, and that's before he even like bonds with this Bren and has basically magical abilities. But long story short, most fantasy stories start with kind of normal person, maybe small scale issue, conflict, and they get pulled into something big. And so as a reader, you imagine yourself into that. And I've always imagined, like, and fantasy stories are often so violent, and there's often so much like physical conflict. And I've always thought it's always been kind of jarring for me to try to imagine myself like suddenly needing to like um carry a sword, or like attack people with spells, or face like constant threats of someone trying to kill me, or whatever the case may be across all these stories. So the amount of violence has always seemed really jarring and kind of implausible for me in terms of thinking of normal people just kind of diving in. Like, even like I just read The Hobbit, as I discussed in my other video, and like, you know, Bilbo at first is like, oh, I don't like carry a weapon, I'm not a fighter, whatever. But like pretty soon into the story, he is like wielding a little sword and like at least trying to attack people with it. And it's so hard to imagine, not only because it's unrelatable, but because also what that would do to your mental health and the conflicts that you would be dealing with internally, and the trauma that people are experiencing. Then, I mean, the next time you read a fantasy novel, just like step back and think about the traumatic experiences that the characters are having. It's crazy. And as a genre, fantasy doesn't really contend with that. Like trauma and mental wellness isn't classically a themes that are really dealt with in the genre. So definite yay to Brandon Sanderson for wanting to contend with those themes and for making it really a central issue in the novel. That's great. And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, I think, you know, especially Shallan's kind of internal journey and dealing with her childhood traumas and the way that her powers are tied up with that. So she kind of using her power, which is called light weaving. She essentially creates alter egos for herself and kind of reverts to those alter egos. Or maybe I shouldn't use revert. Maybe that's too negative of a word, but she turns to those alter egos to help her deal with difficult moments or to kind of hold on to difficult memories so that she doesn't have to process them. And a lot of this novel is her kind of returning to those experiences and stepping away from her alter egos and really revisiting so that she can process past trauma. So I find that all very compelling, and I think it's great. But into the nay column, I think that Brandon Sanderson hit it a little too hard. So I have a couple nays under that broad category. The first one is, and I think I've talked about this in past videos, is it's hard, I think, as an author sometimes to really give your reader the benefit of the doubt and kind of assume a level of like intuition and things like that. And what happens then when authors are struggling with that is they kind of spell things out too explicitly on the page, and they don't leave enough space for mystery, and that can make readers kind of feel kind of patronized. It's like, yeah, I get it. This person is dealing with this mental health issue. You've made that pretty clear. I can see it in their behaviors, their actions, their body language, how they interact with other characters. Like, I don't need you to also give them a line of dialogue that's like, hey, I'm really struggling with this right now. Like, I got it. I'm with you. So it can feel kind of patronizing, and it also does kind of close some doors because there are room for multiple interpretations, and I think sometimes authors struggle to want that in some ways, which is interesting to say because I do think that Brandon Sanderson in other ways like leaves a lot of clues for readers to make connections about like how the universe works. And there's a lot of characters in this novel and others, and not just in the Stormlight Archive series, but in like Mistborn and Elantris and stuff as well. There are characters that appear in multiple of them, and that's definitely Brandon Sanderson like leaving breadcrumbs and wanting readers to kind of make those connections for themselves. but on like a character specific, that's kind of like the world building magic system level. On like character conflict level and character development level, he's just so explicit. And like I said, it kind of makes you feel like he doesn't trust you or believe that you can follow along, and it also closes down some doors for complexity and mystery. So that's one nay under this broad category. And then the second nay is, and this one's going to sound kind of weird and pedantic, but he uses the word therapy a lot in the book. And one of those kind of off-world characters who I just mentioned, who like travels around the universe between the different novels and is kind of a like sage advisor type character in this series, Wit. Wit says to Kaladin, like, "Oh, you're your world's first therapist. Like, you're inventing this new, career and art form and whatever whatever therapy is." And Kaladin like repeats it throughout and is like, "Oh, I'm Zeth's therapist." Like, "Oh, I guess I'm just a therapist. I guess this is what therapy is." And it's really jarring because it's such a modern word, and it just doesn't fit stylistically with the novel. And I've seen other people kind of talking about the word therapy and other word choices in the novel that just kind of like a jarring modernity or a jarring like this world, Earth, Milky Way world ness to it, that just it kind of throws you out of the world building, and kind of throws you out of that temporary suspension of disbelief that is so important for fantasy. So yeah, there's my nays and my yay in terms of the theme of mental health. All right, I have another nay coming at you. And this is the extensive use of flashbacks in the novels. So, all of the novels in the Stormlight Archive series do rely pretty heavily on flashbacks to detail a character's backstory. So each novel kind of focuses on flashbacks for one character. So the first one is Kaladin, then Shallan, then Dalinar, then Navani, and then this one is Szeth. And through flashbacks, we kind of get his backstory. Those I love. Those were great. I think I've established pretty clearly here that what works for me for the series are the areas that are really following specific character arcs, and Szeth's character arc is another one that's very interesting. And he's been kind of a mysterious figure throughout the series. He assassinates Dalinar's brother, the King of Alethkar, at the beginning of the first novel, and he's kind of this mysterious assassin in white who is enslaved, but it's kind of mysterious like how his enslavement happened and what the terms of it are and things like that throughout the series. So it was cool to get his backstory. Unfortunately, he's the person who Kaladin is most prominently therapizing, therapyizing throughout the story. So anyway, those character flashbacks work for me. What is hard for me in this novel is the major emphasis on other flashbacks. And that mainly takes place in the chapters following Dalinar and Navani's journey through the spiritual realm, and then to some extent Shallan, Rlain, and Renarin's as well. But Dalinar and Navani, and accidentally their grandson slash grandnephew Gavinor, a young boy, accidentally like gets swept into the spiritual realm with them. But they travel the spiritual realm, which is another plane of existence in parallel with the spiritual realm and spiritual realm, physical realm, cognitive realm. So the spiritual realm is like a place of like pure energy and magic, essentially, where people can see visions of the past and kind of experience them, and also other things. Probably it's kind of described as sort of like chaos magic soup, and that you can kind of get lost in, and your thoughts and your emotions kind of direct what you see. So in an effort to learn more about the history of their world and the gods, and hopefully get some sort of knowledge or power that will help him beat Odian's champion. Dalinar and Navani go into the spiritual realm, and so their chapters are basically them visiting a series of visions that show the past of the planet. It shows like humanity arriving onto Roshar, the heralds forming their oath pact with honor, the heralds breaking their oath pact, yada yada. So basically all of Dalinar and Navani's story for the whole novel is them in this very like abstract magic chaos soup realm, and then seeing visions of the past. And it's just a lot. It kind of feels like it feels like an info dump. Again, for those of you who play D&D, like, you know, the experience, I've definitely done this as a DM, where it's like, oh, there's all this like cool lore behind this, and I want the characters to understand where they are. And so you have the characters like ask a question to an NPC, and the NPC just like talks at them for 20 minutes about like, oh, the history of this planet, and like that's kind of how it feels. And it's just, again, kind of similar to the god level stakes pulling me out of the story and feeling almost too abstract. This is similar, where it's like, okay, I get like you want me to have all this information, like it's important for the characters, but just so much, and it happens, all of it happens so much, and like all of it happens so much. Well, I don't know what that meant, but all of it just, there's so much that happens in it, and just kind of overwhelming. And I think maybe the problem is, because they're experiencing all those visions in the spiritual realm, there isn't really anything else happening in Dalinar and Navani's like story or character journeys, other than them just like having these big realizations about like the history of their world and their gods and power and things like that. And so I think maybe if it were broken up with like more like daily stuff or some other like interpersonal stuff, maybe it would have felt more balanced. But as it is, it's just, yeah, their chapters are just info dump chapters, and it's not that fun to read. All right, I think that's where we're going to stop it today. I have more to say about this novel, but we don't want to overwhelm anyone, as I have learned after reading Wind and Truth. So it looks like the nays have it for today, Mr. Sanderson. And I will see if folks enjoy this video, I can consider making a part 2, but we will leave it at that for now. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.